It was late in the evening, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound echo. The streets were mostly empty, except for a few cars passing by and the occasional pedestrian hurrying home. In a small part of town, a business owner was finishing up another long day at his shop. The place was modest but well kept, filled with the hum of machines, the smell of oil, and the faint scent of coffee lingering from earlier. He had spent decades building this shop, turning it from a tiny garage into a space where the local community came not just for repairs, but for advice and trust. Every corner told a story. Tools were arranged neatly on racks, spare parts lined the walls, and a few framed pictures of proud moments, certificates, family photos, and awards added a personal touch. He was wiping down the counters, checking invoices, and making sure everything was locked up properly. The evening had gone smoothly. Customers had left happy, engines were fixed, and bills were settled. It had been a long day, but a satisfying one. He turned off the lights inside, leaving a small lamp on near the front door, enough to give a soft glow outside. Without warning, the quiet was broken by the sound of a car screeching to a stop in front of the shop. Two police vehicles pulled in, their tires crunching against the gravel. The business owner's heart sank a little. He had dealt with police before, always respectful and professional, but there was something different about this night. The officers stepped out briskly, badges gleaming under the streetlight. Their expressions were hard, eyes scanning quickly, sizing up the scene and the man standing at the doorway. "Evening, officers," he said calmly, hoping to start things politely. His voice carried a tone of friendliness, but there was also a hint of caution. Something about their approach felt aggressive, tense. The officers didn't respond immediately, their attention fixed on him with a sharp intensity. One of them moved closer, speaking sharply. "You shouldn't be here," the officer said, his tone flat but commanding. "We got reports of suspicious activity." The business owner's brows furrowed in confusion. "Suspicious activity? I own this shop. I'm just closing for the night." He held up his hand slightly, trying to show he meant no harm. "Everything here is normal. You can even check the cameras if you want." The officer didn't seem convinced. He gestured toward the door as if he expected the man to step aside immediately. "Step outside now." He hesitated. He had never been told to leave his own business by a police officer before. The tone of the demand, coupled with the abruptness of the situation, made his stomach tighten. He took a slow step toward the door, but his mind raced. "Is this really happening?" he thought. "Why am I being treated like this?" As he stepped out, the other officer joined, blocking the sidewalk. Their body language was firm, almost threatening. It was a small scene, but the tension made it feel enormous. A few neighbors who had been walking by slowed down, sensing something was wrong. The man stayed calm on the outside, though inside his heart pounded. "Sir, we need to search the premises," the first officer said, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "You can't stop us." The business owner shook his head gently, trying to stay composed. "You don't need to do that. I've done nothing wrong. This is my shop, my property." The officers didn't reply. Instead, one of them grabbed his arm, roughly enough to make him wince. The suddenness of the motion caught him off guard. "Hey, let go of me!" he exclaimed, trying to pull free. But the officer's grip was firm. The other officer stepped closer, his hand hovering near his side, fingers twitching near his belt. It was clear they were ready for confrontation. He realized in that moment how quickly things could get out of hand. One wrong move could escalate everything, but he refused to back down completely. He took a deep breath, trying to center himself. He thought about all the years he had worked hard, the struggles, the sacrifices, the late nights. And now, here he was being treated like a criminal in front of his shop, in front of the few people who were starting to gather on the sidewalk, watching the scene unfold. "Listen," he said, his voice firm but controlled. "I'm not resisting. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm asking you to respect my rights and my property. I'm happy to cooperate if you have questions, but I will not be pushed around in my own business." For a moment there was silence. The officers glanced at each other, as if silently deciding what to do next. The tension hung heavy in the air. A car drove by slowly, the driver craning their neck to see what was happening. A few residents had stopped on the corner, curious and concerned, some taking out their phones to record. The man felt a mix of frustration and unease. This wasn't just about the shop anymore. It was about respect, about fairness, about being seen as a human being rather than a threat. One of the officers finally spoke again, this time with a sharper edge. "Step aside or we'll make you." The business owner's pulse quickened. He felt anger rise, but he forced it down. Losing control now could make everything worse. He knew he had to stay calm no matter what. He slowly moved a few steps aside, opening a small space for the officers but kept his hands visible. Every muscle in his body was alert. He kept talking, trying to reason with them, to appeal to logic over aggression. "I'm telling you, I have nothing to hide. Please just ask your questions. Don't do this in front of people. It's unnecessary. I've lived in this neighborhood for years, built this business with my own hands. You don't need to make this a bigger problem than it is." The officers exchanged another look. One of them sighed as if impatient while the other's gaze lingered, sharp and assessing. The man noticed the sweat forming on his brow, not his own but on theirs. An unusual detail that hinted at their uncertainty. Perhaps even they were sensing that this situation was bigger than just a routine check. He thought about the cameras inside, the evidence they could see if they just looked. He thought about the employees who had stayed behind cleaning, probably watching from the windows, worried but trusting he could handle the situation. And he thought about himself, about every moment that had prepared him for moments like this, every encounter that taught him patience, every lesson about staying calm under pressure. "You don't have to do this," he said again. "I'm telling you, there's no reason for this. Just tell me what you need and I'll give it to you. But this isn't necessary." For a few seconds, the tension almost seemed to ease. The crowd outside shifted, sensing a change, a tiny crack in the aggression, but the officers were not ready to let it go. They stepped closer, maintaining their dominance, hands hovering as if ready to grab again. He took another deep breath, steadying himself, knowing that any sudden movement could trigger violence. He realized the situation was a test of patience, of composure, of presence of mind. He refused to let anger or fear control him. He remembered every story he had heard, every news report about situations like this that turned tragic because someone lost control, because someone reacted too quickly. He would not be part of that statistic. Still, his mind raced. Questions spun around. Why did this happen? Was it the neighborhood? His race? His appearance? The uncertainty gnawed at him, but he kept speaking, kept reasoning, kept his hands visible. He tried to humanize himself in the simplest way possible. "I'm just a business owner. I've done nothing wrong. You can check. You'll see. You'll see that I'm telling the truth." The officers paused briefly, the first hint of hesitation creeping into their posture. They had expected compliance or resistance, but what they saw was calm confidence, a refusal to escalate. The quiet strength in his voice contrasted with their tension, and for a moment the balance of power felt uncertain. The man knew he had to hold this space. He couldn't allow fear or frustration to dictate his actions. He kept talking, calmly explaining that this was his property, his livelihood, and that he had done nothing to provoke the confrontation. Every word, every measured breath, every gesture was meant to de-escalate, to assert control without aggression. Time seemed to stretch. The distant sounds of traffic, the hum of the night, the murmurs of the gathering crowd, all faded into the background. The only thing that mattered was standing firm, being seen, being heard, being treated as a human being deserving of respect. He had no doubt that the next moments could determine how the night ended, peacefully or violently. He thought about his family, about the people in the neighborhood who trusted him, about the legacy of hard work he had built brick by brick, and he thought about the officers, about the human beings behind the badges, about the choices they were making in that moment. He held on to the hope that logic and fairness would prevail, that reason could cut through the tension. The night stretched on, the silence broken only by the occasional sharp word from the officers. The man remained calm, his posture relaxed but alert, his voice steady. He refused to escalate, refused to panic, refused to give them a reason to react violently. Every second was a test of endurance, patience, and courage. And then, in a moment he would never forget, the first officer made a move to grab him again. But this time the business owner was ready. He reached into his coat pocket, slow and deliberate, and pulled out something that would change everything, the proof of his service, his identity, and the story that would command respect. The night felt heavier now, the tension thick enough to touch. The business owner's hand moved slowly into his coat pocket. Every movement was deliberate, careful, and calm. He could feel the eyes of the officers on him, sharp and unwavering, but he did not flinch. His mind was racing, yet his exterior was controlled. He thought about every possible outcome, the way the officers might react, the way the crowd outside might respond. But panic was not an option. He had faced dangerous situations before, ones that required a cool mind and steady hands. This was no different. He reached into his pocket and felt the smooth edges of the badge he had kept for years. It was not flashy, not a display of ego. It was a symbol of dedication, of commitment, of a life spent serving something greater than himself. For a moment he thought about the years that led to this moment, the sacrifices he had made, the challenges he had faced. That thought gave him strength. He pulled it out slowly and held it in his hand, letting it catch the faint light from the street lamp. The officers stepped closer instinctively, their posture stiff. They did not know what was coming, but they could sense that he was not an ordinary person. He took a deep breath and opened his wallet carefully, showing them the identification. The badge gleamed under the dim light, the metallic surface reflecting the seriousness of his service. The officers blinked, a moment of confusion crossing their faces. "This is who I am," he said calmly, his voice steady. "I have served my country in the Special Forces. I am a veteran, and I am the owner of this business. I have done nothing wrong, and I expect to be treated with respect." There was silence. The sudden revelation seemed to hang in the air like a heavy fog. The officers looked at each other, their confidence shaken. The aggressive stance they had carried moments ago was replaced by uncertainty. For the first time they paused, unsure of how to proceed. The power dynamic had shifted, though they did not admit it. The crowd outside was silent too. People had been watching, holding their breath, and now they seemed even more captivated. Some had phones out, recording every moment, sensing that something important was unfolding. The business owner held his ground, letting the badge speak for him. It was more than metal and words. It was a lifetime of training, discipline, and courage. One of the officers finally spoke, his voice quieter than before. We didn't know." The business owner did not smile or show anger. He simply nodded, his gaze steady. "I understand," he said, "but that does not excuse the way I was treated. I am asking you to leave my property and let me finish my night in peace. This shop has been my life's work. I take care of my community. I take care of my employees, and I do not deserve to be treated like a criminal." The officers shifted uncomfortably. Their hands moved slightly, unsure of what to do next. They had expected resistance, perhaps fear, but not calm authority. The calmness in his voice, the seriousness of his badge, and the dignity he carried changed everything. They realized they were in a moment that could easily be shared, recorded, and questioned. The presence of witnesses outside made it even more delicate. One officer muttered something to the other. The words were inaudible to the crowd, but the tone was full of hesitation. They were considering the consequences of their actions, aware that continuing aggression could turn the situation into a public relations nightmare. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The business owner remained steady, not moving too quickly, not showing impatience. He understood the value of control in these moments. The officers finally took a small step back, their posture less threatening, though their expressions still carried a trace of discomfort. He kept the badge in view, a silent reminder of who he was and what he represented. The crowd outside seemed to sense the change. Whispers began to spread among the onlookers. People were impressed, amazed, and in some cases angry at what they had witnessed. They could feel the tension of the night, the unfairness of the situation, and the calm courage of the business owner. It was inspiring. Some shook their heads, others murmured their support quietly. Every person watching understood that the scene was extraordinary, that the normal assumptions of authority and compliance were being challenged. Inside, the business owner felt a strange mix of relief and caution. The immediate threat had lessened, but he knew the night was far from over. He had faced many difficult situations in his life, but each one required careful navigation. The officers could still make mistakes, still act on impulse. He needed to stay alert, keep his words measured, and maintain control of the space. "Thank you for showing your badge," the first officer said finally, his voice still cautious. "But we received reports. We need to confirm things." "I understand," the business owner replied. But the reports were mistaken. You have nothing to confirm. You are welcome to check the cameras or the records if you like, but there is nothing illegal or suspicious here. The officers exchanged another glance. There was a tension between their sense of authority and the undeniable truth that they had been wrong. The situation was delicate. Any wrong step could make them appear even worse in front of witnesses, some of whom were now quietly filming. The business owner recognized the moment. He needed to be careful not to provoke them further, but also not to give up his ground. The first officer took a step back, his body language slightly more relaxed. We will check quickly," he said, still avoiding eye contact. The business owner nodded. "Please do. But remember, this is my property and I am asking for respect. Treat me like a human being. That is all I am asking." There was a long pause. The air felt thick with anticipation. The officers moved slowly, walking toward the entrance but not touching him again. Their focus had shifted from aggression to procedure. The business owner watched them carefully, ready to react if needed but still calm, still measured. He felt a sense of pride, quietly, that he had managed to maintain control. The night could have gone differently in so many ways, but he had not lost his composure. That control, that steady presence was what had changed the entire situation. It was not just the badge. It was the confidence, the calm, the refusal to react in fear or anger. As the officers moved inside, the business owner glanced around at the small group of witnesses outside. People nodded at him subtly, their eyes showing admiration and respect. They could see that he had handled a tense situation with dignity. Some whispered encouragement, others just watched quietly, understanding the power of staying calm under pressure. Inside, the officers were checking the shop, their steps cautious. The business owner followed at a safe distance, ready to answer questions, ready to explain, ready to assert his rights if needed. Every word he spoke was calm and factual. He did not raise his voice, did not make sudden movements, did not give them a reason to escalate. "You see," he said quietly, pointing to the neatly organized tools. The invoices stacked carefully. "This is a legitimate business. There is no theft, no crime, no suspicious activity. You can verify everything here. My employees are trustworthy. I am trustworthy. You have no reason to treat me like a criminal." The officers nodded slowly, their demeanor shifting from aggression to careful observation. The badge in his pocket had not only represented his service, it had also reminded them that he was trained, disciplined, and capable of defending himself if necessary. Their initial assumptions about him were now challenged. They realized that appearances could be misleading, that assumptions based on a person's race or location could be wrong. After several minutes, the officers stepped back, visibly more cautious. One muttered something about calling it in, while the other checked the shop briefly before stepping outside. The business owner stayed close to the doorway, calm but alert. He watched the officers, ready to maintain control, ready to ensure that the night ended without further confrontation. Outside, the crowd's murmurs grew louder. Some people clapped softly, some shook their heads in disbelief. They had witnessed a moment where courage, calmness, and dignity had changed a potentially dangerous encounter. The business owner smiled slightly, not out of arrogance but from a sense of relief that he had maintained composure and control. The officers finally returned to their cars. They spoke quietly among themselves, a clear acknowledgement that the night had not gone as expected. The business owner stayed at the door, keeping an eye on them until the cars drove away slowly. He took a deep breath, feeling the tension release from his body but also recognizing the importance of the moment. This was not just about him. It was about fairness, respect, and the way people should be treated regardless of assumptions. As he stepped back inside, the employees who had been watching from the windows quietly came forward. They nodded, whispered words of encouragement, and expressed their relief. The business owner smiled, appreciating their support but staying focused on the work that still needed to be done. The night was far from over, but he had survived the first wave of confrontation. He thought about the lesson the night had already taught. Calmness, dignity, and confidence could change situations that seemed impossible. Respect could be commanded not by force but by presence, and even in moments of danger or misunderstanding, it was possible to maintain control and protect oneself while still being human. The shop was quiet again, the sounds of machines long since silenced. The street outside was calm once more, But the memory of the officers, the tension, the crowd, and the badge lingered. The business owner knew that the night would be remembered, not just by him, but by everyone who had witnessed it. And he knew that the real challenge was not over. There were still conversations to be had, explanations to give, and lessons to share. He leaned against the counter, taking another deep breath and prepared for whatever came next. The night had shifted, though the quiet outside made it hard to tell at first. The earlier tension lingered, a subtle hum that stayed with every step and every glance. The business owner stood near the doorway, still calm, still composed, but more aware than ever of how delicate the situation had become. The officers were inside, moving carefully, as if every action was weighed against the possibility of consequences. He could see it in the way they hesitated, the way their eyes darted around the shop, and the way they exchanged silent glances that seemed to question each other's judgment. He did not rush them. He knew that patience was more powerful than force. The badge he had revealed earlier had already shifted the energy, and now it was time to let it work its effect. Every minute that passed without confrontation was a small victory. He could feel the officers' unease growing. Their confidence, once steady and assertive, had cracked, and that crack was spreading. The presence of witnesses outside, the quiet murmurs of the people watching, and the realization that they could be recorded at any moment added weight to the tension. He thought about the moments that had brought him here. Years of training, discipline, and self-control had prepared him for situations like this, though not for the unfairness of being treated like a criminal on his own property. The feeling was familiar in some ways, but the stakes were different now. This was not a battlefield, but the same lessons applied. Stay calm, assess the situation, control the moment, and protect yourself without escalating. "Sir," one of the officers said, his voice still cautious, almost hesitant. "We need to ask some questions about what's happening here. Can you tell us about the activities inside the shop tonight?" The business owner nodded slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Of course," he said. "Everything you see is normal. Customers came and went, repairs were done, invoices were settled. Nothing out of the ordinary. I have nothing to hide, and I am happy to answer any questions you have." The officer paused, looking unsure. It was clear he wanted a different reaction, perhaps confusion, fear, or anger. But instead he got composure, clarity, and a willingness to cooperate. That combination was disarming. The second officer remained near the counter, glancing around, his posture less aggressive than before, though still alert. They were still trying to assert authority, but the atmosphere had changed. The business owner took a step closer to the counter, still keeping a respectful distance. "You can check the records if you want. All transactions are logged. Cameras are available. Everything here is legitimate. I understand you are doing your job, but I am asking for respect. I am not a threat." The first officer muttered something under his breath and moved toward the registers, his hand slightly trembling. The second officer's gaze lingered on the badge in the business owner's hand, the metallic reflection catching the dim light. There was no denying the truth now. This was not just a civilian. This was someone with training, discipline, and authority earned over years of service. The reality of that fact settled over the officers, and the tension that had seemed like it might explode began to dissolve slowly, replaced by hesitation and doubt. The crowd outside had grown slightly, drawn by the quiet unfolding drama. They could see the subtle shift, though not all of the details. Phones were raised, recording the interactions. Whispers carried through the street. Questions about what was happening. Comments on how the man had handled the situation. The business owner's calmness was not just a shield. It was a lesson being observed by everyone present. People were beginning to understand the power of dignity, patience, and courage. One of the officers finally spoke louder, but still measured. "We need to make sure there's no illegal activity going on here. There were reports and we have to follow up." The business owner nodded again. "I understand. But the reports were mistaken. You can see for yourself. I am asking you to verify, not to accuse. This is my livelihood, my employees' jobs, and my property. Treating me like a criminal is unnecessary and unfair." There was a long pause. The officers were clearly assessing their options, weighing the consequences of continuing aggression against the wisdom of stepping back. The business owner remained calm, his presence commanding without a word of threat or anger. He knew that any sudden movement from him could escalate the situation, so he stayed relaxed, measured, and observant. Minutes passed slowly, each one stretching the tension until it almost felt like hours. The officers moved around the shop, checking the registers, glancing at the neatly organized tools and briefly looking at the workstations where employees had been working earlier. Everything was in order, and yet they hesitated. It was clear they were aware that their assumptions had been wrong. The realization that appearances could be misleading had finally sunk in. The business owner spoke again, his tone calm but firm. "I am not trying to make this difficult. I am cooperating. But I will not be treated like a threat in my own business. I am asking for respect, nothing more. Please understand who I am and what this place represents." The first officer paused, glancing at the badge again. His fingers brushed the edge of it, almost unconsciously, as if seeking reassurance that what he was seeing was real. The second officer's posture softened slightly, his shoulders relaxing a little, though his eyes still watched closely. The realization was clear. They had underestimated him, and now they were adjusting, trying to navigate the new reality. Outside, the murmurs grew louder. People whispered to each other about what they had witnessed, comments about courage, respect, and discipline. Phones captured every movement, every word, and every glance. The business owner remained focused on the officers, but he also recognized the importance of the witnesses. The public eye was a silent ally, reminding the officers that any action could be observed and recorded. "You have a badge," one of the officers said finally, almost a statement rather than a question. "You served in the Special Forces?" The business owner nodded. "Yes, I served my country. I trained for situations like this, and I learned the value of patience, discipline, and control. That is what I am using right now. Not aggression, not force, but calm and respect. This is my shop, my livelihood, and I am asking you to recognize that." The officer swallowed, a small but noticeable gesture of discomfort. The reality of the situation was hitting him. He had approached this night with assumptions, perhaps even bias, and now he faced a truth that challenged everything he believed about the person in front of him. The business owner's calm authority, combined with the weight of his service, had shifted the power dynamic in ways that were subtle but undeniable. The second officer finally stepped back, nodding slightly. The tension in his body eased, though a hint of uncertainty remained. The first officer's hand lingered near his belt, but the grip had loosened. They were still cautious, but the aggressive energy that had dominated the first encounter had faded. The business owner had claimed control not through force, but through presence, calm, and the undeniable truth of his identity and actions. He allowed a small exhale of relief, knowing that the immediate threat had passed, but aware that he needed to maintain composure until the officers left. He kept his movements slow and deliberate, hands visible, eyes calm but attentive. Every word he spoke reinforced the reality that he was not a person to be underestimated, and that respect was not optional. "Thank you for cooperating with us," one officer said finally, his voice quieter, almost hesitant. We need to make sure everything checks out. Reports can be misleading." "I understand," the business owner replied. "That is why I am showing you the truth. Nothing illegal is happening here. You can check everything and you will see that I am right. But I ask that you remember, respect is not earned by authority alone, it is mutual. You can perform your duties without assuming wrongdoing, and I can maintain my dignity without fear." The officers moved slowly toward the exit, their steps careful. The business owner followed at a respectful distance, ensuring that the boundary between authority and respect remained clear. Outside, the witnesses could see the subtle shift in posture, the quiet acknowledgement that the situation had changed. What had begun as a confrontation was now a careful observation, a negotiation of presence, and a mutual recognition of humanity. The crowd's murmurs continued, soft but persistent. Phones recorded, some people whispered words of admiration. Others shook their heads in disbelief at the aggression that had occurred before the revelation of the badge. The business owner stayed composed, allowing the officers to leave on their own terms, maintaining dignity and control. As the officers finally returned to their vehicles, they exchanged a few quiet words. The engine started and the cars pulled away slowly, leaving the street quiet once more. The business owner stood at the doorway for a moment, letting the relief wash over him, though he knew the night was far from over. There were still conversations to be had, lessons to share, and awareness to raise about the way assumptions could affect interactions. The employees emerged from the back, their expressions a mixture of relief and pride. They approached quietly, offering words of gratitude and quiet acknowledgement of the courage they had witnessed. The business owner smiled, not out of arrogance, but from a deep sense of relief and accomplishment. The night had been difficult, unfair, and tense, but it had also proven that calm authority, dignity, and patience could change even the most challenging circumstances. The shop was quiet again. The lights cast soft shadows across the walls, reflecting the organized tools, the neatly stacked parts, and the small personal touches that made the place more than just a business. The night had tested more than patience. It had tested the principles of respect, fairness, and courage. The business owner knew that the experience would remain with him, shaping how he approached challenges in the future. Even as the immediate threat had passed, the lessons lingered. The badge was more than a piece of metal. It was a symbol of training, discipline, and earned respect. It had reminded everyone present, officers and witnesses alike, that assumptions could be dangerous and that dignity could command attention without force. The night had been long, the tension intense, but the outcome had reinforced the value of calm, composed action in the face of aggression. The street felt different now, quieter yet charged with a new kind of energy. The officers had stepped back, their previous aggression softened, but the memory of the tension still hung in the air. The business owner stood near the doorway, calm but alert, knowing that the night was not fully over. He had maintained control through composure, but the situation was delicate, and he needed to be careful until the very end. The crowd outside was still there, though many had moved slightly away, giving space while keeping eyes and phones focused. People whispered to each other, sharing what they had seen and what they thought had happened. Some were shocked, some impressed, but all seemed aware that the events of the evening had been unusual. They could feel that something important had occurred, something that spoke to fairness, respect, and courage. The officers remained in their cars for a moment, talking quietly among themselves. It was clear they were reassessing the night, trying to make sense of what had happened. The badge had changed everything. The first officer glanced toward the shop repeatedly, his body tense, fingers tapping lightly on the steering wheel. The second officer seemed more withdrawn, thinking carefully, aware that every action had been observed and potentially recorded. The shift in their demeanor was noticeable, a mix of humility, uncertainty, and reflection. The business owner stayed calm, letting the moment unfold naturally. He understood that pushing or arguing further could undo the progress he had made. Every second of calm authority, every measured word, and every gesture of composure reinforced the reality that he was in control of the situation without needing to escalate. His patience was now speaking louder than any shout or argument could. One of the officers finally stepped out of the car, moving slowly toward the shop. His movements were careful, almost hesitant, and he did not make eye contact immediately. The business owner met his gaze, steady and composed, letting the officer feel that this was not a situation to be taken lightly. There was no fear in the stance, no challenge, just a clear message of dignity and strength. We just want to make sure everything is in order," the officer said, his voice quieter, more tentative than before. "We didn't expect—" He trailed off, clearly unsure how to continue. The words hung in the air, unfinished, as the business owner waited patiently. "I understand," the business owner replied softly, maintaining calmness. "But I want you to understand that I have done nothing wrong. My business is legitimate, my employees are trustworthy, and this community knows me. I am asking for respect. That is all I'm asking." The officer nodded slowly, glancing at the badge again. It seemed to anchor his attention, a constant reminder that the man in front of him was someone who had trained, served, and faced challenges far beyond this street corner. There was no aggression in the words, no fear, just a firm, steady presence that demanded recognition. Outside, the crowd seemed to shift as well. People whispered to each other, some shaking their heads in disbelief at how the night had started. Phones recorded, capturing the moment, the subtle shift in authority and the quiet dignity that had diffused the situation. The business owner knew that the witnesses were not just observers. They were part of the story now. Their eyes, their cameras, and their understanding amplified the impact of every action he took. The second officer stepped out of the car as well, moving cautiously. He paused at the edge of the sidewalk, hands visible, showing that he meant no harm. His expression was more thoughtful than before, a mix of reflection and perhaps regret. He looked at the business owner and then at the witnesses outside, the reality of being observed adding weight to every decision. The business owner spoke again, softly but clearly. "You can check everything you need. All records are here, all tools are accounted for, and all employees are present. You will find nothing wrong. I am cooperating fully, but I ask that you treat me and this business with the respect that every person deserves." There was another long pause. The officers looked at each other, then back at the shop. They were aware that continuing any form of intimidation could now backfire. Every word, every action had been recorded, and the truth of the situation was clear. The business owner's calm authority, combined with the visible badge, had shifted the balance. It was no longer a confrontation. It was a demonstration of dignity and control. The first officer finally spoke, a tone of respect now in his voice. We understand. We just need to verify a few things before we leave." "Of course," the business owner replied. "Take your time. Check what you need and you will see the truth. But please remember, respect goes both ways. Authority does not justify assumptions or unfair treatment." Inside the shop, the officers moved slowly, checking records and glancing around. Everything was in order, just as the business owner had said. Tools were neatly arranged, workstations were clean, and invoices were stacked carefully. Every employee was present and ready to answer questions if needed. The reality of the legitimacy of the business was undeniable. The business owner remained near the doorway, calm and observant. He could feel the shift in energy. The officer's initial aggression had softened completely, replaced now with caution, respect, and perhaps some self-reflection. They were no longer the threatening figures from minutes ago. They were professionals realizing they had misjudged the situation. Outside, the crowd continued to watch quietly. Some whispered words of admiration. Others shook their heads at the injustice of the earlier behavior. Phones recorded, capturing every small detail, from the careful movements of the officers to the steady composure of the business owner. It was clear that the events of the night were leaving an impression on everyone present. The first officer finally returned to the doorway, checking one last detail before stepping back. "Everything seems fine here," he said, a note of relief in his voice. "We apologize for the misunderstanding." The business owner nodded slowly, accepting the words but remaining composed. "Thank you. I appreciate that. I hope this is a lesson for the future, about assumptions, about respect, and about treating people fairly. That is all I ask." The second officer followed, adding quietly, "We will report that everything is legitimate. There is no issue here." Outside, the witnesses murmured among themselves, some nodding in approval, others whispering about the courage and dignity displayed. The business owner allowed himself a small exhale of relief. The immediate threat had passed and the officers were leaving. But he also understood that the impact of the night would extend beyond this street, beyond this shop. It was a story about fairness, respect, and the power of calm authority in the face of aggression. As the officers returned to their vehicles and drove away slowly, the tension finally lifted. The business owner stepped fully into the shop, closing the door behind him. He leaned against the counter for a moment, reflecting on the events. The night had been unfair, challenging, and tense, but it had also reinforced lessons he had known for years. Calmness, patience, and dignity could change situations that seemed impossible. The employees who had been watching from the windows quietly came forward, offering words of support and relief. They admired the courage and composure of the business owner, knowing that his actions had prevented a situation from escalating further. There were no loud celebrations, no dramatic gestures, just quiet acknowledgement and mutual respect. The business owner smiled slightly, not from pride, but from a sense of relief and accomplishment. He knew that the badge he had revealed was not just a symbol of past service. It was a reminder of discipline, patience, and earned respect. It had changed the night, and it had reminded everyone present that appearances could be misleading, and that dignity and composure could command attention more than aggression ever could. He walked through the shop slowly, checking that everything was in order, ensuring that the employees felt safe, and taking a moment to breathe. The night had tested more than patience, it had tested the principles of fairness, respect, and courage. And in every way, the lessons had been clear. Outside, the crowd slowly dispersed, leaving whispers of admiration and reflection behind. The street returned to its quiet rhythm, the soft hum of cars and distant voices filling the night. But the memory of the officers, the tension, the badge, and the calm authority of the business owner lingered. It was a story that would be remembered by those who witnessed it, a moment where dignity had won over aggression, patience had won over haste, and respect had been demanded without force. The business owner leaned against the counter one last time, reflecting on the night. He had faced a challenge, maintained control, and turned a potentially dangerous situation into a moment of calm authority and respect. It was a reminder that in life, even when faced with unfairness or aggression, composure, dignity, and courage could change the outcome. The shop was quiet, the lights casting gentle shadows across the walls. The night had been long, but it had proven that calmness and patience were more powerful than force or intimidation. The badge was not just a symbol of service. It was a reminder of what could be accomplished with training, discipline, and a clear mind. The business owner knew that the night would stay with him, shaping how he approached challenges in the future. It was not just about this shop or these officers. It was about the way people treated each other, the assumptions they made, and the respect they owed to one another. The night had been a lesson in fairness, patience, and the power of presence, one that he would carry forward with quiet pride and steady resolve. The night finally settled into a quiet calm, though the events that had unfolded lingered in everyone's mind. The business owner stood in the middle of the shop, taking a moment to breathe deeply and let the tension leave his body. The adrenaline that had kept him sharp and alert throughout the confrontation began to fade, leaving behind a mixture of relief and reflection. He looked around at the space he had built with his own hands, the shop that had been a part of his life for so many years. Every tool, every part, every carefully arranged workstation reminded him of his journey, the long hours, and the dedication it had taken to create something meaningful. His employees emerged from the back, still quiet but visibly relieved. Their expressions were filled with respect and admiration, knowing that the night could have gone much worse. They had seen him stay calm, assertive, and controlled, even when it seemed like the situation could spiral out of control. Some shook their heads silently, amazed at how he had handled the officers without anger or confrontation. Others simply nodded, a quiet acknowledgement of the strength he had displayed. He smiled softly at them, not out of pride but out of gratitude for their presence and their trust. "Thank you for staying calm," he said. "I know it wasn't easy to watch, but your support made a difference. It's not just me here, it's all of us who make this shop what it is." The employees nodded, their respect evident in the way they stood, quietly listening, knowing that the lesson of the night had extended beyond the immediate confrontation. As the evening drew on, he began to think about the larger impact of what had happened. The officers had left, but the story was far from over. It would travel through the neighborhood, through the people who had witnessed it, and through the recordings that had been made. The lesson was clear. Assumptions could be dangerous and calm. Measured action could change situations that seemed impossible. He had shown that dignity, patience, and presence were more powerful than aggression or intimidation. The first thoughts that came to his mind were about his community. He had worked hard to build trust and relationships over the years. People came to him not just for repairs but for advice, guidance, and fairness. The night had tested that trust, and in the end it had reinforced it. Those who had seen him handle the situation would carry the story forward, spreading the message that respect and patience could change even the tensest moments. He also thought about the officers. They had made assumptions, approached the situation with unnecessary aggression, and underestimated him. But he did not dwell on anger. Instead, he reflected on the importance of understanding, training, and awareness. He hoped that the night would leave them with a lesson about judgment, respect, and the consequences of acting without knowledge. Perhaps it would change how they approached situations in the future, making them more thoughtful and careful in their interactions with others. The shop was quiet, the lights casting soft shadows on the walls and tools. He walked slowly through the space, checking that everything was in order. It was a small ritual, a way to regain normalcy after the tension of the night. Every corner of the shop carried memories of hard work, long days, and determination. The night's events added another layer, a memory of resilience, composure, and the ability to turn a difficult situation into a teaching moment. He paused near the front door, looking out at the empty street. The moonlight reflected off the pavement and the soft hum of distant traffic filled the quiet. It was a moment to reflect, not just on what had happened but on what it meant. The confrontation had been unfair, yes, but it had also highlighted the importance of being prepared, calm, and confident in one's actions. He realized that true strength was not in force or aggression, but in patience, understanding, and the ability to maintain dignity under pressure. The employees gathered around, still quiet but attentive. He spoke to them gently, sharing his thoughts. Tonight was a reminder that we never know what we might face, even in our own space. But how we respond matters. Calmness, patience, and respect can change outcomes. We control ourselves, and in doing so, we influence the world around us. They listened closely, absorbing the words, understanding that the lesson was not just about confrontation, but about life itself, how to face challenges with composure and integrity. As the night wore on, he thought about the community that had witnessed the events. People had seen courage in action, patience in the face of aggression, and dignity when unfairly challenged. He knew that these lessons would ripple outward, reaching neighbors, friends, and strangers alike. It was a reminder that every action, every word, every choice mattered. Even small moments could have a big impact when handled with care and presence. He reflected on the role of the badge he had revealed. It had been more than a piece of metal. It was a symbol of discipline, service, and experience. It reminded him and everyone present that respect could be commanded through presence, not through fear. The officers had responded not just to the badge, but to the calm authority behind it. The story of the night would show that training, patience, and composure were powerful tools, far more effective than confrontation or aggression. The business owner then turned his thoughts inward, thinking about his own growth and resilience. He had faced many challenges in life, some more dangerous than this, and each had taught him lessons about courage, patience, and integrity. Tonight had reinforced those lessons, proving once again that the principles he lived by were effective, not just in theory, but in practice. He felt a quiet satisfaction not from victory over others, but from having maintained his dignity and turned a difficult situation into a positive example. As the shop settled into a peaceful rhythm, he checked on his employees one last time. Their faces reflected relief, pride, and understanding. The night had been a test, and together they had navigated it successfully. He knew that the trust they had in him had been strengthened, and that their own confidence and composure had been reinforced by witnessing the events. The shop was not just a place of business. It was a place of learning, respect, and community. He thought about the future. This night would remain a story, a reminder that even when assumptions and aggression arise, calmness, patience, and integrity could change the outcome. It would serve as a lesson for his community, for those who witnessed the events, and for himself. The principles he lived by had proven their worth once again. The first rays of dawn began to appear, casting a soft glow through the windows. The night had been long, challenging, and tense, but it had ended with clarity, respect, and reflection. The business owner stood at the doorway, looking out at the quiet street, thinking about the people who had watched, the officers who had approached with assumptions, and the lessons that would stay with everyone involved. He realized that the night had been more than an incident. It had been a moment of teaching, a demonstration of calm authority, and a reminder that dignity could influence even the most difficult situations. It had shown that fairness, patience, and respect were powerful tools, and that true courage was often quiet, composed, and thoughtful. As the employees began their morning routine, tidying up and preparing for the day, he walked through the shop, reflecting on the events once more. Every corner, every tool, every piece of equipment seemed to carry the memory of the night. It was a reminder that hard work, patience, and integrity could withstand any challenge. He finally took a seat at the counter, allowing himself a moment of quiet reflection. The adrenaline had faded, leaving clarity and understanding. He thought about the people who had witnessed the events, the officers who had learned an unexpected lesson, and the community that would carry the story forward. The night had been intense, but it had also been transformative. The business owner leaned back, letting the calm of the morning fill the space. He felt a sense of relief, gratitude, and quiet pride. The night had tested his patience, his composure, and his dignity, It had challenged him in ways that were uncomfortable but ultimately affirming. He had turned a potentially negative situation into a positive example, one that would resonate far beyond the walls of the shop. He knew that the story of the night would be shared, remembered, and reflected upon. It would serve as a lesson in courage, calm authority, and respect. And most importantly, it would remind everyone involved that how we respond to challenges defines not just the outcome, but who we are. The shop was quiet, the morning light soft, and the air calm. The events of the night had passed, but the lessons remained, etched into the minds of everyone who had witnessed them. The business owner sat quietly, reflecting on what had happened, understanding that the night had been a test, and that he had passed it with composure, patience, and dignity. In that quiet moment, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment, not from confrontation or victory, but from knowing that he had handled an unfair situation with grace, had protected his business and his employees, and had left a lasting impression on those who had observed. The night had ended, but the story would continue, a testament to patience, calm authority, and the power of integrity. He stood up, stretching slightly, and began preparing for the day ahead. The shop would open, customers would arrive, and life would continue. But the memory of the night, the lessons learned, and the example set would remain. It was a story of courage without aggression, respect without demand, and authority without intimidation. The business owner looked around the shop one last time, smiling softly. He knew that the night had changed something, not just for him, but for everyone who had witnessed it. It was a reminder that dignity, calm, and respect could overcome misunderstanding, assumptions, and aggression. And that realization, above all, was worth every tense moment that had come before.